Hello and welcome. You're joining us live here on India Today's social media handles. I'm Akshita Nandagopal, and today I have with me both Gaurav Sawant and Shiv Arur, who are joining us here in our social media studios. And the reason is that this Friday we witnessed history for two reasons. One is the INS Vikrant, first made in India aircraft carrier being commissioned by the Prime Minister, and second because the Indian Navy has got a new ensign. We'll start with INS Vikrant first, because just before we went live on this broadcast, Gaurav and Shiv were having a very interesting conversation about how this is so special for them. Gaurav, you're telling me about how you've seen this from scratch, quite literally.
It indeed is, and we just shared a laugh because you were in junior school, Shiv perhaps was in college, when in 2002 this project was initiated for India to have a Make in India aircraft carrier, 2002, and I was reporting this right from that time. In fact, Shiv and I just had a conversation even about the Rafales. After the Kargil war in 1999, when MMRCA project was conceptualized, I was reporting this project right from them when she was in junior school.
Yeah, I must have been 10 years old.
10 years old, and Shiv was in school. So it is a great moment even for reporters. So I can just imagine how Indian Navy is feeling today, how the government must be feeling today, because right from the time when people said we'll make an aircraft carrier in India, and when we asked really, and they said why not? We're a civilization, we're a seafaring civilization from time immemorial. You know, from the Indus Valley civilization, Lothal used to have ships that would sail out a lot of our concepts, and Navy says we've known this, the country hasn't known this, let's get back to our history. So you know, the metallurgy for this done by DRDO, as the Prime Minister said. We can make our own steel, we can make our own ships. It's a great moment, yeah. Shiv, don't you feel so?
No, I totally agree. It's a day of pride, not just as citizens, but as journalists. Like Gaurav was telling us just now, Akshita, I was in Kochi. I think Gaurav was also there. In 2005, I had just become a defense correspondent a few months earlier. And this was early 2005, if I'm not mistaken. We were in Kochi. The Indian Navy had taken some of us there, and we actually witnessed the steel cutting. So imagine like a small little plate of steel being cut with a welder to ceremonially depict the beginning of the manufacturing of that ship. So that little plate of steel is now 45,000 tons of hulking, war machinery that's now, in the hands of the Indian Navy. So it's the word epic is misused so much nowadays, but this is truly epic. Going from that little plate of steel to 45,000 tons, going from pieces of drawings on a drawing board that Gaurav has seen to the actual object floating there in the sea. In all its glory. It doesn't even fit in one single camera frame. That's how big it is. You've got to be far away from it to take it all in. Is something that I don't think any of us will be able to fully digest. So absolutely, a day of great pride as a journalist, as a citizen, as a defense correspondent, anything you can wish to name.
I think what happens inevitably is when you see these pictures of INS Vikrant, it doesn't sink in as to how huge or how massive it is. I'm sure both of you realize it, but for someone like me, it's a ship, and that's pretty much it. But I think when you get words like, 2 football fields, when you hear about steel equivalent to 3 Eiffel Towers being used for the ship, then you understand the gravity of what we're talking about, the scale of what we're talking about as well. But in such a circumstance, the fact that all of this is made in India, Gaurav, what does that mean going forward? What else are we capable of then?
So, what we should be capable of is realizing our power and harnessing it for the future. We don't have to import a Hercules or a Hermes that we did, HMS Her Majesty's ship Hercules in 1961, if I remember correctly, to become INS Vikrant, and Hermes to become INS Virat. Both great ships. I've had the privilege of sailing on both, Vikrant and Virat. Vikrant, of course, was then in harbour, and Virat out at sea in exercises. I've done a jack stay, again a privilege, when Prime Minister's Day at Sea in 1998, Atal Bihari Vajpayee, or 99 if I remember correctly, Atal Bihari Vajpayee was Prime Minister of India. Prime Minister's Day at Sea, I did a jack stay as a reporter from INS Virat to INS Ranvijay, which is like 2 ships moving out at sea, and in 2 moving ships you move from one to the other on ropes. It's fascinating, with the Prime Minister watching, with the Chief of Naval naval staff, Raksha Mantri, all of them watching. I did a jack stay. It's fascinating.
Can I just add here that you must have a very strong stomach because I've been out I think once on the INS Chennai and I was so seasick, so I can't imagine what this is like. You must have a very, very strong stomach to be able to pull something like that because these sailors, all of them, they were so casually walking by, so normally acting like for them this is land, right? It's pretty much like that for them, and for all of you also, that kind of experience to be out there is something very, very unique, and many of us won't be able to really understand what that's like.
So it actually depends on what's the sea state like, because when the Prime Minister is at sea, it's usually very calm. In the sense he's only taken there on those times. When it's sea state, maybe 6, 7, 8, when it's very choppy seas, I haven't been on board a ship in those times, but I really look forward to it. But Shiv, you've done a jack stay. It's so fascinating.
I've done a jack stay, and also, when the sea is very rough, you'd feel it if you were on board a smaller warship, Akshata. You would have felt the turbulence in the. On something like INS Vikrant, you will barely feel the turbulence. This is such a big hulk of a ship. There will hardly be any movement. But Gaurav and I have been on trips with the Indian Navy where we've seen other journalists puking all over the place. Being seasick, confined to their cabins and stuff. But Gaurav and I, being the committed defense correspondents that we were, I think even if we did feel seasick, we just bore it and fought it until we found our sea legs, and then nothing happened. But on a serious note, the INS Vikrant and aircraft carriers like it are significant for the question that you asked, Akshata, which is, what does it mean having made it now, for the future? Never underestimate the DRDO steel that Gaurav was talking about. That steel, that warship grade steel, was unavailable in India. We needed to import that steel, and since we didn't have that steel, we needed to import warships. We simply couldn't make an aircraft carrier of this kind without that steel. And therefore, our scientists, men and women, put their heads down and created this steel from scratch right here in India. And now India actually exports that steel to other countries. All in a matter of a couple of decades. And it's not as simple as putting a few metals together and creating it. It's like the kind of steel that needs to be able to withstand heat, tropical temperatures, salt water, corrosive elements. And India has the worst of all weather. Remember, so if it's built for India, remember it's built for the world. So it's a great thing. The technologies that have gone into Vikrant will stand us in amazing stead in building stealthier, faster, lighter warships in the future. Some of these technologies will go into India's nuclear submarine program in terms of the electronics and stuff that we're building there. And the expertise, it's not just about the ship. The expertise of precision welding. Cutting materials in a very fine way. What the Prime Minister mentioned, things like nanomaterials, optical fiber technology, all of those have been, in many ways modified for this project. And they're going to have huge, huge spin-off benefits going forward. Gaurav, you think so too?
Absolutely. Look, this will actually be a game changer. You don't have to spend precious foreign exchange. Right now it's 76% make in India. In the times to come, you want to move to 100% make in India in terms of your fighter jets, in terms of your helicopters, in terms of aircraft engines. All of this you want to do in India. We'd embarked on that project, and because Shiv and I also like to read about military history. So when you started with the Marut, HF-24 Marut, you made your own make in India aircraft, but then you said it's an underpowered engine, and you didn't keep developing it, you didn't modernize, and you kept importing aircraft. That was the need of the hour. But simultaneously, make in India should have been really big. This push to make in India now needs to be sustained, irrespective of what government is in power. Sustain make in India so that you make everything here and export to the world. Make cheaper world-class material. Your respect as a nation will grow world over. I mean, even China's making its own warships. It's making aircraft carriers, and at a much faster pace. I was reading somewhere that China, I think, has added 200 warships. In the last.
They've got a factory. They're building them like biscuits.
Yeah.
Chinese Navy is no match in terms of the number of warships they're building is huge. I mean, the quality, of course, let's not comment on that. The Indian Navy's warships are of far better quality, but in an actual fight, the numbers will actually matter.
So what they're doing is, in the past 200 years, no other navy has grown faster than the Chinese Navy. 80 warships have been added in past, I think, 10 years or 5 years. I'll get those statistics in a moment. But that's the pace at which we're doing. Again, as Shiv very rightly pointed out, they're doing quantity. Apparently, their quality, according to some Western analysts, is not very good. And their sailors are not very good, is the Western analysis.
Okay, so
One
sure.
point, Akshita, which actually goes to your question about self-reliance, which is that Gaurav was in Ukraine recently, journalist who spent the longest time there. Not many people know that the gas turbine engines that power INS Vikrant are Ukrainian. They're built in Ukraine and imported obviously long before the war actually happened. But the very fact that supplies of such material from Ukraine are now under threat and under impact, will we be able to maintain them properly, spare parts, things like that? That's one of the biggest reasons why we need to build all this stuff in India. So in this particular ship, the gas turbine engines have come in from Ukraine. Who is to say we'll ever be able to get the same gas turbines again in the future, given what's happening in Ukraine? That's the reason why it's such a huge imperative for us to make everything here in India.
I think it makes a huge difference then that you're not dependent going forward. 76% hopefully, and I'm sure we will see 100% very, very soon as well. Let's focus on the other big takeaway from the entire ceremony today, which is the symbol, the identity of the Indian Navy changing. Just explain that, Shiv, if you could first, what the new symbol is all about. There's an octagonal shape, it's blue. What's the symbolism all about in that?
I was getting a lot of messages while we were anchoring before this, Akshita, and I think the words that we used struck a chord with the veteran community when they said, "You've captured it, Akshita and Shiv have captured it, that this is a day of great emotion and an overwhelming sort of day for the Indian Navy, because not only are they getting this wonderful made in India Swadeshi warship, but they're getting a new identity and a new ensign, their Nishan, their flag. So it's an incredible day of emotion, which most of us civilians won't be able to capture. Gaurav probably would because he's a Fauji kid, but you know what I mean. But the ensign is it's glorious, isn't it? It's the thing that's going to flutter and fly on all our warships wherever we go. It was in the 1970s that the Indian Navy had first said, why do we have St. George's Cross? It wasn't a religious thing. It was not. There was nothing against any religion or anything like that. There was a sense that the St. George's Cross is a colonial era relic. It's the St. George's Cross is England's flag. So why does it still fly on the Indian Navy's ensign? In 1970, there was a person called Vice Admiral Vivian Barbosa, if I'm not mistaken, who first moved that proposal. I don't think he lived to see his dream come true, because it was only in 2001 when the Vajpayee government decided, yes, let's get rid of it. Gaurav Sawant, incidentally, was in the Indian Express that time. He broke that story, causing a huge flutter among the Indian Navy and the government at that time, where I hear that George Fernandez was very upset and he said, "Kisme bola isko," and stuff like that. He was upset because it was meant to be a huge surprise and everything. But Gaurav Sawant, being the intrepid reporter that he was, he broke the story, and so the Navy had to make do without having a surprise when they announced it. But so Vajpayee had removed the Red Cross of St. George, but it was put back in 2004 under the UPA government, largely because the Indian Navy had said that the earlier crest was sort of diminished in visibility when it was on the flag on the ocean, and because of the colors of the sea, etc. But I don't know why the St. George's Cross was brought back. Couldn't there have been other options? Especially since these things are symbolic. Let's not forget that the colonial era symbolism is very important as far as India is concerned, and that it was a great opportunity to let it go. So I'm not sure why it was brought back. It's not political. I don't blame anyone for it. But I think a greater application of mind would have happened, especially since, and Gaurav will be able to talk about this a little better, that our maritime legacy and tradition goes back millennia before the British were even real. Before Great Britain even existed. The Cholas, the Maratha Empire, the fact that Shivaji's royal seal, Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj's royal seal is now echoed in this new ensign is fabulous, and I think it cuts across all barriers. It cuts across all communities, religions, governments, and recognizes that we had a combat navy centuries before all this bakwas became like a political issue. And I think that's fabulous. It just cuts right through it.
I can see Gaurav, you're beaming with pride. I just want to follow up, and if you could give us details of what happened in 2001, because that seems like an interesting story. So many years on, can you reveal who gave you the information first? 21 years. Let's make a few headlines here. Let's make a few headlines here. I think now you can afford to tell us one. Second is, why did it take so long? If 1970s or even before that, why wasn't this discussed as much as it needed to be?
So, okay. So my source remains my source, and I'm very grateful to my source for giving me that story. It's held me in such good stead even after so many years. And in the Indian Express, it was a front page story. It was a front page story when Indian Navy did away with St. George's Cross, and it was a little similar to the one that's come today. But this one is even better than what was there in 2001. The thinking, as Shiv very rightly pointed out, was let's do away with colonial legacy. Again, if I could take us back, we Indians, the people who reside in this subcontinent, we taught the world how to sail. We are the ones who our history tells us. The Indus Valley civilization, Harappa, Mohenjo-daro, Lothal. Lothal used to be a major trading point from where big ships sailed out, and we've forgotten all our legacy. Why have we forgotten all our legacy? Because of centuries of invasion. They killed our teachers, they burnt our books, and they made us slaves. So our entire concept was all that we serve, that we follow orders, that we are not thinking people, and whatever we know, our architectures come from outside, our knowledge has come from outside, everything's come from outside. We gave it to the world. It's only now, and the Navy knew this. Shiv and I, when we sit with naval officers, and not now, I'm talking about the first time I went out Prime Minister's Day at Sea was 1998. That time I was sitting with a young captain of the Indian Navy who later became a big admiral, and all these big guys, these flyboys of the Indian Navy, they become really big. Fighter pilots, so being a naval fighter pilot is a very big thing. The ship is moving, the fighter plane is moving, and the ship, the sea is rough. That's the time you have to land. So you really have to be a rock star to be able to land a fighter plane on a moving ship, on a moving runway, so to say. So one of those naval fighter pilots had told me in a conversation over a drink while out at sea, because you're allowed to drink only on board an aircraft carrier on ceremonial occasions and a tanker. No other warship can you drink. And we were on board an aircraft carrier, and we've had some great times even together, out at sea. So over a drink, he told me about how navigation, compass, all of that actually originally came from India. India taught the world how to sail. We are learning that all over again.
I think that's why it's such an emotional moment as well. When that new symbol was put out and hoisted for the first time on board the INS Vikrant. Thanks very much, Shiv. Thanks, Gaurav. Yeah, sure.
Before we sign up, and Shiv and I have had a conversation about this. Kanhoji, so the Cholas, we're a seafaring nation. Our trade was with entire Southeast Asia, and when you see a lot of Hindu culture or Indian culture in Southeast Asian countries, how did it come? There were no aircraft that were. It went by sea. So the Cholas, great trading people, great warriors. Raja Chola, Rajendra Chola, in that entire empire. Or what we don't read about Shiv is Kanhoji Angre. Kanhoji Angre. One of the greatest Indian admirals of all times, never lost a battle at sea, defeated almost all Western powers that came and attacked India, and Indian, right outside Navy Chief's office, one big statue that you see is of Admiral Kanhoji Angre.
Yeah, no, the naval tradition is undeniable, and this is one of the things that has been so difficult, Akshita, because of the way our histories are written. And I'm not saying that the past should ever be erased. I'm a strong believer that the past is the past. It has to remain there. We've got to learn from it. But there is so much of our past that has not been taught to students and children. I remember that there was very little about the Maratha Empire in my history textbooks. A brief mention of the Cholas in ancient Indian history. So whether it is selective or not is not clear. But the fact is, the the naval tradition that Gaurav talks about, Kanoji, Angre, the Marathas, the Cholas, and others, is something that has actually been carried forward in many ways. There are many ancient naval traditions, things that happen on board a ship that actually go back from that time. It's incredible to see, and I don't know if anybody's really documented those things, but this is a tradition that I think deserved an echo in something modern. And I think in some small way, even if it's symbolic, the fact that it's there in the Indian Navy ensign is really going to be good. And I hope that it actually triggers a greater wave of curiosity about our ancient naval traditions.
Though what may just happen, Akshita, if I may, there's a huge debate right now in our country and across the world. The United States has 11 aircraft carrier battle groups and huge size, 98,000 ton displacement. And all nuclear powered. You know, so 98,000 ton displacement aircraft carriers, and Shiv and I have been on board at least a couple of them, USS Carl Vinson, a couple of others out at sea during not just exercises but in active operations against the Islamic State. But the concept is, do we need these big aircraft carriers? Because I think INS Vishal is what we are looking at next, IAC-2. Do we need a 65,000 ton displacement aircraft carrier, or do you look at long range fighter jets and missiles, longer range missiles and submarines? That's the big debate.
It is the big debate. And just to close, Akshita, that's General Bipin Rawat, who was the Chief of Defence Staff when he was alive. One of the biggest debates that he had triggered was actually about aircraft carriers, where he said, you know, since our adversaries like China have developed ship-killing missiles, anti-aircraft carrier missiles like the DF-21, should we really be putting more aircraft carriers at sea? Why don't we rather invest in things like what Gaurav said, long-range fighters, long-range weaponry, and importantly, nuclear submarines, which will basically ensure your adversaries can't enter your oceanic domain. Sea denial, it's called. So he's no longer there. We still don't have another Chief of Defence Staff. So that debate's kind of in a limbo right now, but hopefully now with INS Vikrant entering service, there will be a sort of rejuvenation of that. It's very important because the Indian Navy is very clear. They want 3 aircraft carriers.
So hopefully this is the first step of many more such conversations also that we'll have a reason for if, of course, we see these kind of historic moments for our forces. This is a huge, huge moment for us as a country, and hopefully this conversation with Shiv and Gaurav gave you a glimpse of how important it is for us as a nation to celebrate these moments and hail it as well because of the kind of effort that's been put into it. Thanks very much again, Gaurav and Shiv, for joining us here on this broadcast. That's all we have time for. Thanks very much for tuning in.